Welcome to the Some Insights podcast.
SoMe stands for social media, of course.
I'm Dante Licona, a social media strategist and consultant.
And I'm Matthias Lufkens, founder of Digitips.
In this podcast, we talk to the people who manage social media accounts for organizations and their executives. They all have interesting stories to tell.
The idea is to learn how they're managing accounts, how executives engage on each platform, and hear their tips and tricks. We want to learn from the best cases of social media usage.
Today, we're happy to have with us Céline Schmidt, a humanitarian communicator. She was the spokesperson in Paris for UNHCR, the UN Refugees Agency, and she is now their strategic partnership advisor in Kabul, Afghanistan. Welcome to the show, Céline.
Thank you very much.
Céline, can you share with our audience a little bit about your professional journey, how you got to be a humanitarian communicator?
I didn't start my career as a humanitarian communicator. I studied politics and international law with an objective to fight injustice and to, get engaged for justice. And during my career, I realized that communication is so important for that as well. Working with partners, communicating with partners, with people, with governments, using social media to communicate. And so I ended up, in the end, I think, becoming a communicator for a cause and for a reason, which is to advocate for the people who are forced to flee their homes, who are displaced, who are hoping for peace, and who are hoping for solutions. And I think, to find solutions for them, communication is key.
You mainly communicate in French through your social media channels, and you do it so effectively that LinkedIn recognizes you as a top voice contributor. What have you learned about consistently communicating on LinkedIn for a Francophone audience?
In the UN, we communicate a lot in English. And English is our first language. We work in English, we write in English. Even though I'm a French speaker, during my career, now I've been with UNHCR for 16 years, I've worked in English all the time, even when I was posted in French-speaking countries, Much our communications are first produced in English and then translated. And this is what I was doing as well when I was in the field before. I worked for a few years in the Great Lakes region of Africa. I've worked for a few years on content production with photographers, videographers, and I was writing the text. And I was doing all of that in English, and then it was translated into French. But then when I arrived in Paris, even though, the majority of the people we work with understand English, they read English, they speak, I thought, let me use my language, because now I'm in a French-speaking country. And I think if I use French, I'm going, it's obvious, no? But I'm going to be better in communicating to our partners, to our people. So I started, of course, I had to build my audience. I think I started LinkedIn when I arrived in Paris a few years ago. And then I realized, that people were interested and more engaged with what I was doing, because I was sharing information, sharing the right information. That was very important for me at that point, explaining why refugees are fleeing their country, why are they coming to France, what can people do, what are the solutions. So I was communicating a lot about solutions and positive. Of course, sometimes we also have to condemn situations, and we do it. But I was really focused on solutions, working also on socioeconomic inclusion, access to jobs. And this is why I chose LinkedIn as a platform, because this is where you find the private sector CEOs, people who are looking to employ people, and refugees are talent. So the LinkedIn team started to interact with me as well, because they were interested to see how they can also contribute and help. So we did a few, online sessions. I met with the team, and it was very, very positive. And I think that's why also, then they selected me as a top voice, because they saw that what I was doing had an impact. We were able to mobilize people and to find solutions. And yes, for that, it was crucial to do it in French, I think, in the language of the country where I was, and which is my native language.
What are some of the differences for tailoring communications for a Francophone and an Anglophone audience?
That's an interesting question. For someone who has been working in English for a long time, and maybe not even always in a very good English, in the English we use in the humanitarian world, I've been asking myself the question, am I more efficient in English because I know the codes? Or am I better in French, where maybe I don't know all the codes because I'm not using French, as a language during my work. So I think I had to learn again to write in French. In French, we write very long sentences. When you write a sentence in English, the French translation can be 3 sentences. So I had to think how to efficiently communicate, to be clear, to give the right information very quickly, but also to make sure we translate well from English to French what we do. Because very often what we do is that we do translations and then we post it as it is, but we don't edit again. So it was an entire process, to learn and think, oh, maybe that's not exactly the right word we should use in French. Maybe that's not exactly the translation. So, it was a process. And then, of course, I was not alone in Paris because I set up a team working with me. So I also had a digital communications team. And it was a lot of brainstorming with them. How can we be efficient? And also, which platforms we use. So I think in the end, the recipe is the same in English and in French. It's be clear, be honest. Don't use the jargon, tell the facts, and be authentic. Because if you do that, people are going to understand what you do, and they will know as well that you're telling the truth. So I think that's what we have to do in all the languages.
What are some of the main challenges you face as a communicator specialized in advocating for refugees and people forced to flee?
We need pedagogy. We need to explain, what we do. We use a lot of jargon. We think as professionals in our sector that people understand. So it's challenging to be able to explain in a simple way what we do, what it means to be a refugee, what refugees are hoping for, what are their dreams, what are the solutions, what different partners can do, because everyone can do something. So that's a challenge. But then another challenge as well, it's a subject that is passionate, no? It's a human subject. It's about people. Some stories are very sad, and it's about the life, of people. So it's also a challenge to explain that, and the best, by the way, to tell that are the refugees themselves, to tell their stories, and that always has a huge impact. But it's also passionate because it's used sometimes by people, by politicians, to create disinformation, fake news. And that's quite challenging because when you start to grow your profile and to become, I wouldn't say famous, but have more followers, you come out of your ecosystem, you reach out to other people. Sometimes you become a target of people who want to say refugees or migration is a problem. And that's a challenge. And I've faced, that challenge. After interviews I've done, telling that refugees are talents, that, they contribute to the society in which we live. I've been attacked, on social media, and that has been a challenge. And then in that situation, we should not be scared, and because I think a reason of the attacks also is to scare people. So, we have to keep the courage to continue to do what we do and not think what we did or what we said was bad. So I think that's a challenge, trying to convince that what is important is the right information, and that refugees are people who flee war, they have, or conflict or persecution, they have no choice. It's their life is in danger. But there are talents where they arrive. They want to contribute to the society. They want to live in peace. They want to have a future for their families. So I think this is a very important message we have to constantly tell in order, to make sure like people know what is the truth and to face, those challenges.
On a positive note, are there any specific posts you remember that resonated well with your audience?
Yeah, and I think those are the positive posts, when you talk about solutions and when you show that welcoming refugees, giving them a chance, contributes also, to a better society and to live together and, in peace and have a better future. So I think I received, many positive feedbacks when I did post about a program we do in schools. So we started the program in schools to allow middle school teenagers, students, and refugees to meet and interact. And the program, by the way, is called Interact. So refugees are invited to middle schools. They tell their stories. Very often, like the youth, the children are really, surprised, very positive, surprised, and, in admiration of refugees after what they had to go through, that they're able, to reconstruct their life and to have kind of a new life in a new country. So, I was telling that in some of the posts, and I was telling the comments of the youth saying, refugees, they are so courageous. We admire them. We wish them all the best for their future. Very, very positive words. And, I got a lot of positive feedback when I was posting stories like that, which, brings hope. And it shows that, yes, if you tell positive stories, people interact because people want to hear positive stories as well. No, I think they hear a lot about negative stories, and that's the feedback we often receive. When, as a UNHCR communicator, or when we interact with people and we ask them, what kind of news are you listening to? What kind of program? What kind of newspapers do you read? And often people say, "Oh, I don't watch the news anymore because I'm tired of bad news." So I think people, yes, are willing to read good news and positive stories. And this is, where we as UNHCR and I myself got quite a lot of positive feedback.
Our listeners want to know how our guests deal with crisis. I'm sure you have faced many. What have you learned about crisis communications? Are there any practical tips that you can share?
I mentioned to you before, I had to face some crisis situations. And also, our job as UNHCR is to work in crisis situations. We work worldwide in situations where there is conflict, war, violence. So a lot of our communication is linked to crisis communications. I think my advice would be, first, pause and think. Don't react immediately when there is a crisis, even though, yes, we have to react quickly. But first, we have to pause and assess what is the situation. Because all the messages don't need a reply. Sometimes, if you are attacked for a wrong reason, maybe the best solution is not to reply in order not to spread also the fake news. Maybe the first reaction we would have is, no, that's wrong, that's not true, let's react. Let's give the arguments to react. But maybe sometimes the best is not to react. And then if we have to react, yes, we have to do it very quickly to give the facts, but remaining calm and patient, so like it's a practical advice, but this is the advice, I would give. First, pause and think, what's the best solution and seek advice as well, because teamwork is the key as well, no? And I do that, in all my jobs, and I do that as a communicator as well. I always ask for advice and feedback from my colleagues, but also, of course, refugees. Do you think that's the right thing we should do? That's the right way to respond? And yeah, I think in the end, if we do that, we find the right way to respond.
Thanks for that advice. Some of our listeners are students who want to pursue a career in international humanitarian affairs. Do you have any tips for them?
Yes. My tip would be, don't give up. If you want to do that, do it. If it is your dream, go for it. Because I know it can be difficult. It can be competitive on one side. But on the other side, it's also difficult because we work sometimes in difficult situations. But I think what we do is very important. So, yeah, my advice would be, don't give up. Go for it. There is no best training or, diploma to do that. We need skills. We need people who have human skills as well. Being a good team worker, being patient, being passionate. Those skills are so important as well. And this is what I tell students as well when I meet with students. I used to go a lot, to universities because I was invited to talk to students. This is also what I tell them. And I've recruited quite a lot of people also during my career, even young people who are coming to see me for an internship or a first job. And for me, of course, people need to have the expertise of the job. But I also think people can learn. And when you are a student, you don't know everything. You're going to learn your job throughout your career. But what is very important is that you're committed to what you're willing to do, and your human skills. And maybe a specific message I could also give to young women, because that's a question I receive a lot as well. When I go to universities, women are asking me, oh, but as a woman, can you be a humanitarian? How do you do? Because still there are some maybe mental barriers as a woman thinking, can I do this? Can I go abroad? Would I ever have a family? And so what I always tell those young women is go for it, because you have a lot of time. And in the end, it's possible to combine different things. Don't think you can't do it. So that's a specific message, I want to give to young girls. And women, yeah, you can do it.
Following up on that, being a woman in Kabul and Afghanistan, that must be quite a challenge.
Yes, but I think it's also important. And, it's important for UNHCR also to have women here, to work here. And we are able, to work. And it's important, I interact with many people. I think I can bring something as a woman. I can interact with women here. Maybe there are some things I understand better than a man, no? Because I can feel what women feel. So I think it's very important. And it was, a decision for me to go to Kabul, to Afghanistan, to leave my family in France, because I was convinced, that I can bring something as a woman here.
And finally, a battery of standard questions which we put to all our guests. Who's your favorite and most inspiring social media mentor?
My favorite mentor is not someone famous. When I started working as a communicator with UNHCR, 15 years ago, I opened my Twitter account in 2010, I remember, and I started doing tweets. And then I started using more social media during the Central African Republic crisis as of 2013. And UNHCR was starting to work on social media, and we had the first colleagues who had dedicated positions on social media. And one of them, her name is Alexandra Yordolian, she was then our social media manager to UNHCR. And I remember she reached out to me and she said, Céline, oh, wow, you're telling the story of what you do. every day in the field. This is so important. She gave me advice. She convinced me that social media was important, and we became friends, and for me, I still remember that because this is when I really felt, yes, so we have to use social media to communicate. And then I think I would not tell them mentors, but people who motivate me, who inspire me, who push me to do things as well, are the younger people. And especially, my team in Paris. I had a team, digital communications team. They were all much younger than me. Jocelyn, Elodie, Clémence. And they were always pushing me, saying, no, Céline, we have to do more. No, that's not anymore the way we do social media. We have to go on those platforms. You have to do that. And then, at first I was questioning them, but then I was thinking, yes, they are right. So I think they are my mentors. Even though I was their supervisor, and I could guide them on some things, they could guide me on that.
Big shout out to Alexandra Carun Erdolian, friend of the pod, and to all the team that you had in Paris. Which are your 3 favorite accounts to follow?
I follow some accounts of French media, including Le Monde, Agence France Presse, West France, which is like a local newspaper, but which I like very much. And I follow those media to get the right information. And that's very important for me. They also have podcasts. So these are accounts I follow. Then another favorite account I have, and I follow on LinkedIn, and I advise you to follow her as well, is a woman who is from Syria. Her name is Lynn Youssef. And she is telling her story. She's from Aleppo. She was a pharmacist. And she's telling her story on LinkedIn. What it meant for her to live in Syria during the war, and why she finally decided to flee after a few years. And she decided to write a book. But she started on social media and mainly LinkedIn. She's also a poet, like from being a pharmacist in Syria, she started, doing some poetry workshops in France, in Paris at La Sorbonne, and now she's a poet and she wrote a book. And I follow her and I read her posts, like every time she posts something, because it's her story. It's very moving. It inspires me, and also her strength inspires me, because she's now living in France. She has to start a new life. She tells what it means. So that's something. It's very important for me. So that's an account I follow, and I hope she doesn't mind me mentioning her name. And then a third account I follow, which is called Actu Migrant, and it's an account that gives specific information on migration. The latest news, solutions, explanations as well for refugees and migrants. And I think it's very important because those news are not very often covered. And I think it's quite important there is a specific account covering those news.
Which are your favorite social media channels for professional and personal use?
For my job, I obviously, I use LinkedIn a lot because this is where I can interact with partners from the private sector, but also public sector, governments, NGOs, journalists, even though a bit less journalists, influencers, refugees who have created startups or NGOs. So LinkedIn is quite important for that, to get information, but also to share information in order, again, to find solutions. I also follow Twitter, X, because this is where I follow journalists. Because this is where, I read the news. And then for private reasons, I also follow Instagram because I like to look at, beautiful photos and food and, travel. So I also like Instagram, but more, like for, personal reasons, for leisure.
Do you have a podcast that you're listening to regularly?
You were asking me before about Afghanistan. I really love the podcast of Lise Doucet, which is called A Wish for Afghanistan. So this is a podcast. I think I listened to it several times, and I really like her, the podcast, and I also admire her as a journalist. I listen also to, currently I'm listening to a podcast about legends, musicians in Africa, because I've lived in quite a few countries in Africa, and it reminds me, of my time there, of the musicians. So, for example, Taboulé in the DRC, Cesaria Evora in Cabo Verde. And I've lived a few years in Cabo Verde, and I think that feeling of Saudade, always remembering the good times of your life somewhere, I kind of adopted it. So that's also something, it's a nice feeling when you work as a humanitarian to sometimes, also listen to those podcasts and have a moment of escape. And then I listened to, a podcast on France Culture, which is called Le Temps du Débat. And, it's debate about news stories. So yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I can't, mention all of them, but these are the ones I listen.
Talking about time to escape, do you ever disconnect, and how do you avoid social media burnout?
Here, it's more difficult in Afghanistan because, my life is my job, no? And I live in a compound with colleagues. We work a lot. We are here for that. We work a lot because there is a lot to do. So there is not a lot of time to disconnect. But I try to do, and I disconnect when I do yoga. So I try to do that every day, because this is also something that has helped me throughout my career when I was in difficult situations. I think somehow yoga saved me, when I was working in all the difficult situations. So that's the time I have, every day to escape. But when I am at home, I escape because I have a daughter, and I've decided that when I am with her, I'm not going to be on my phone. So, that's much easier. So every night I put my phone aside, I stay with her, I take time with her, we talk, we play, we do something else. So she doesn't want to play with my phone either, So easier at home than here, I have to admit.
And finally, in one sentence, what is your social media mantra?
It's very short. I think it's be authentic. Is that enough? As a reply?
It's excellent.
Céline.
Okay.
Céline, merci beaucoup. Thank you for your time and your honest answers. Thank you for joining us for another episode of our SoMe Insights podcast with me, Matthias Lufkens.
And me, Dante Licona. Please subscribe and follow us on our social accounts. Goodbye, and until next time, à bientôt.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.